summer in the year of 2000, our 4-year hiatus in the lonely countryside was over. The months after our exodus, my mom, 2 sisters, and father found ourselves temporarily camped at my grandparents' house in the steel town of Hamilton, Ontario, waiting for our new house to be built. It was there that my mind, body, and spirit started sinking into a hopeless abyss. I found myself washing my hands incessantly for fear of contaminating what? I don't know. I couldn't pull myself away from the slavery of my thoughts without the help of my dear mother, whose training as a behavioral therapist was a lifeline for me. Whenever you have that thought, picture a red stop sign, she would say. I sat on the bed in front of her, caged in feelings of doom, imprisoned by an influx of dopamine. Okay, I said, and then I got up, pacing the room. Sit down on the floor, said Mom. I can't. That summer of 2000, I lost a lot of weight. I lost my appetite. Who can eat when anxiety parades the stomach? It was very serious. I couldn't sleep. What was happening? Critical conversations ensued with the family doctor, who knew me since I was 5 years old. A prescription soon landed, and it appeared that I was getting better as the first year of high school rolled around. My family and I moved into a new house, and 20 years later, and thousands of days swallowing earth salt to keep my brain chemistry intact, walking with God through the extraordinary challenges of mental health, completing a nursing degree and graduate school, now a PhD in nursing, I am here to honor the creator of heaven and earth with my experiences as a Black Canadian female, respecting both the science and the puzzling questions that we have about spirituality, mental health, and how to make the most of it. Welcome back to This is Freedom, a podcast where we talk about mental health, spirituality, and finding freedom in our lives. We join with guests to discuss topics that challenge our mental health and spiritual health, and we explore holistic ways of coping. Here, we hope to inspire a journey of freedom. Today, I want to welcome my mom, the woman who gave life to me. Shelley-Ann is the mother of 3 adult daughters, of which I'm the oldest. And we're going to talk about what my journey was like as a teenager when I first started experiencing mental health challenges, and how she supported me through this time, as well as offering some tools for how parents can support their teenage kids going through similar situations. Welcome, Shelley-Ann.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
It's wonderful to have you finally. I've been really looking forward to this episode. It's probably going to be the most emotional episode that I do. So, Mom, back in June 2001, I was 15 when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I had a psychotic episode at that time, which the psychiatrist said was induced by a manic state. And from that narrative that I introduced earlier, I remember a lot of symptoms starting that summer before I started high school. And they persisted probably a year or 2 into high school before I actually had an official diagnosis. What did you observe at that time when I started to experience symptoms? And what was this like for you?
Well, the first thing is that your symptoms of anxiety really presented as a type of OCD, which was very severe, very sudden, and with really no, preamble at all. So at that time, we were staying with your grandparents while the house in Mississauga was being built. And I remember the first sign of this was one day you went to have a shower and you called me. You were frantic and you said, Mom, I want to have a shower. And I said, okay, go ahead, have a shower. And you looked at me with the most incredible look in your eyes. You were so lost and you turned to me and you said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And my
Yeah.
heart just sank because I knew that something was incredibly wrong. And whatever it was severe. And whatever it was, we could not see it. It was not something that was going to be easily fixed.
Yeah.
And that was really the first sign, is that I had to help you do everything at that
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
Is that your procedural memory was gone. The anxiety
Mhm.
was so high also that your cognitive abilities had been impaired.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that being one of the most frustrating things during the anxiety and during depression was just the complete slowing down of thinking and not remembering process of how to do simple things like get dressed, steps to have a shower. I mean, very basic things, you
Yeah.
know, very serious. So depression and anxiety really does take a toll on cognition. And I don't remember that being the first thing that had started, not being able to have a shower. I do remember being in the house and a lot of that washing my hands frequently and
Yeah.
just feeling like I was contaminating things. And I was eating very poorly, I remember, because I did lose weight and I found it hard to eat as well. So
Yeah,
very physical
everything.
symptoms,
Oh,
very
absolutely.
physical
Yeah.
symptoms.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
symptoms would jump out at you. They were not something, contrary to what one typically sees with, let's say, depression, right? Where you can live with someone who's maybe depressed for quite some time and you don't recognize that that person had been depressed. And in fact, that was the case with you. We saw the anxiety right away. But it wasn't until you were actually in treatment with a psychiatrist and a diagnosis had been rendered, then he asked us to look back on times in the past, and we started to examine when you might have been depressed. And so that was, we assumed that that would have happened the previous year because the anxiety and your hypomania was so severe that the psychiatrist had assumed that there had been a significant period of depression that predated that.
What predated the mania? Yeah. While I was experiencing depression, I remember there were days when it was hard to get out of bed and I would try to go to school. And there were kind of, I would say, few days between. And then there were moments when I felt okay and I had energy and I was doing well in school. And then I noticed I started to have like this need to leave and to travel, like to leave the house and to kind of jump out of my skin, so to speak, like needing to get away.
You described it that way.
Yeah.
You felt like you were jumping out of your skin.
Yeah. And I needed to move, needed to go places, needed to see friends and just be busy.
And that, Michelle, I just want to interrupt. That was very contrary the Michelle that we had known up until that point, right?
Yeah.
Because up until that point, you were someone who had assumed a lot of responsibility for your siblings. Not that you were required to, but it was just in your nature. You love looking after your sisters. You love looking after your youngest sister. And while I was working and traveling, you took on this sort of like a quasi, mother role, even though you weren't required to do that. And so you were a homebody. You were always very focused on your schoolwork, never had to tell you to do your homework.
Yeah.
And so throughout grade 8, you were top performing, very much a homebody, very much a reliable teenager,
Yeah.
So when these symptoms started, and then, you were always sort of jumping out of your skin, it was just so very opposite to the personality, to the person that we had known.
Yeah, up until that.
There was definitely something going on. And so because you were just at the cusp of teenagehood at 13, 14, people were saying, oh, she's just a rebellious teen. And even that didn't make any sense to me because it wasn't a gradual thing. It was just so sudden. It was just so sudden that I didn't believe that this was something that was just hormonally mediated. And so that first year of your high school was very challenging But then you hit another very significant period when you went away with the school band to New York.
Yeah.
And that was another huge turning point. So I think the key thing is that what we were seeing as family, what I was seeing as your mother, it wasn't this sort of a gradual sort of change. There were these milestones
Yeah.
or these significant events that occurred in your life. And when they occurred, they had these significant sort of bullet kind of effect.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I ended up, don't remember how, but I remember having these periods. Like I was in band and I played the clarinet and went to New York. And I remember feeling very kind of dissociated from life and feeling very foggy in my mind. And although I was performing and going to New York and doing everything I needed to do, at the same time, there was this foggy feeling that I had. For me, the significant point when things really started to change was when I was in, I think it was grade 10. I remember feeling like something special was happening, like
Mhm.
something important was going to happen that day.
Mhm.
And for some reason, I got it in my mind that people, students, friends, I don't know who were going to plan this party for me, and that everyone for some reason was wearing the same color, like people would do when they get together to have surprise parties or celebrations, and there's a theme. And for some reason, I had that in my head. And I remember going down to the guidance counselor's office, and they called you. And I didn't even know why you came. So I didn't know really what was happening, or that even a teacher was that concerned to call the guidance counselor and have you come and pick me up. And that was the day that we went to see the psychiatrist who gave me the diagnosis. We went straight there. I remember driving in the car and we went to go see him. And up until that point, I had quite typical symptoms of, at that time, we called it manic depression. I feel like it was like a crossover period where they were starting to call it bipolar disorder. But I remember you explaining all the symptoms that I had, because there were periods where I was very productive in school. My memory for Shakespeare was very good, and I'd be up all night reciting Shakespeare from the top of my head, which is not very easy to do, memorizing lines. And
Well, you weren't just memorizing lines, Michelle. You were memorizing like a whole act, and you would be able to recite the parts of 5 different people at the same time and changing your voice. And,
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it was really concerning, because this was, sort of bordering on a savant kind of expression. It was really quite inexplicable at the time. So very concerning, because as you mentioned, at the same time, you were obviously going through a period of psychosis where you thought that everybody was wearing blue jackets, et cetera, et cetera. And so when the guidance counselor called me, that's when we really doubled down with the meetings and trying to put things in place to give you extra time, the supports that you needed from a medical perspective, but also the accommodations that you would need in school so that you could continue to have the kind of success that you had been used to.
Yeah. And I will get to that, because there's actually a letter that I pulled from my files that you wrote to the school to help me with accommodation.
Oh.
So I found it, and I thought, you know what? I want to read some of this, because let me tell you, guys, my mom, when it comes to advocating for her children, was top. And I feel very blessed because she studied as a behavioral therapist. And what I will read to you soon was actually the words of my mom describing my behavior to the psychiatrist to help him with the diagnosis. So we're back in the car. We left the high school. We're on the way to the psychiatrist. And after my mom explaining what was going on between the changes in my energy from low energy, depression, not being able to concentrate throughout my grade 9 and 10 years, and then having lots of energy and wanting to always leave the house, and then having the psychosis period, my mother wrote, "Not sleeping, flight of ideas, inappropriate social behavior," which is quite funny for anyone who does know me. Grandiosity, labile mood, just changing from one emotion to the next very quickly in the span of one day. Highly easily agitated, fluctuations of appetite. This is you wrote this. I know that was
Wow.
your writing.
Wow. Okay.
And
Sounds very clinical.
yeah, it does sound very clinical. But well, I guess that's where I get my love for academia, and my interest in mental health obviously came from my own experiences. But I'm so grateful that you had insight into mood and behavior, and just knowing me very well and knowing when things really shifted for me. So after this diagnosis, I remember going on medication, an antipsychotic, and I remember, I think it was like they only wanted to give it to me for like 5 to 10 days. And I remembered sleeping a lot at first. So this antipsychotic really does remove that paranoia and hallucinations. And I remember sleeping a lot for a while, and I remember it going away. It did work to get the psychosis out of the way.
Right, but when you were prescribed that medication, I can't remember what it was now. It wasn't meant to just be a short-term thing, but based on your response to the medication, we took you off that medication because you said it was making you so flat. It was flattening who you were. And you felt like you were no longer being yourself. You were no longer Michelle. And that really, really bothered you because you said, you preferred to be manic and be productive than to get rid of the psychosis and be so incredibly flat that you no longer recognized yourself.
Well, I think this psychosis I was happy to get rid of, because that was scary. And a lot of people will say, I remember one of my psychosis episodes thinking that there was a bomb in the toilet, and if I'd flush it, it would go off, or thinking there were cameras in the house. Very scary things that was at the height of the mania. So I was glad to get rid of the psychosis. But yeah, to not be productive, to not be myself. And people would describe me as bubbly and, friendly and social and doing well in school. And to feel slowed down is very hard when you know yourself otherwise. So once the psychosis left, what was the next step? Because I know I got connected to a child psychiatrist, and I started on lithium. Do you remember kind of that transition? Because I know I stopped taking the antipsychotic, and then I started on a mood stabilizer, the lithium.
So I just want to backtrack a little bit because the diagnosis of bipolar disorder type 2, I think was your diagnosis.
No, it was type 1.
Type 1, okay. That took some time to come about. And I want to touch on this because I think this is important for parents to understand, is that as parents and as family members to someone going through this, you are the best benchmark because you have known that person for years, if not their entire life. And so it is really upon you to be able to keep track of these changes to support the person, not just from a perspective of advocacy, but because as a support, you're really that litmus test. You're really the benchmark in terms of understanding the things that they've always enjoyed doing, so that when you're starting to look at planning to address depression and things like that, you can be a significant contributor to that as well. But the diagnosis came after a lot of trial and error. Initially starting with your physician, who was obviously very well-meaning, but had prescribed you things that made your anxiety worse.
Well, it put me into a manic episode, which is the antidepressant, which is the key sign of having bipolar disorder, is being on an antidepressant. It switches you into mania. So that event, although it was very distressing for me, I remember just being beside myself.
You were beyond beside.
I was
you were
it was bad.
You were fit to be tied. Like I don't think that anyone listening could even begin to imagine what someone experiencing that level of anxiety would be like, because you literally could not stay still.
Yeah.
Like you were physically just jumping up and down and sitting at my desk, and 2 seconds later you'd be up and you're running out of the office and running around the house, and you were just beside yourself. And at that point I said, absolutely not. This medication, you've got to get off this medication.
Yeah.
And so, you as a parent, you have to have veto power. You have to have enough confidence that regardless of what the medical experts might say,
Mhm.
you have to know when something is just not working at all, and to have the confidence to
Yeah.
stop it or to start something, etc.
Yeah, as a
that's
parent,
challenge.
that was really in your hands. And I think of it
Mhm.
now, Mom, like you had to be like, okay, no, this is stopping. Yes, we're gonna continue with this,
Yeah.
or what. And obviously listening to my thoughts, and
Mhm.
thank you for listening to me too,
Mhm.
and seeing what I needed at the time. And once I went on that antidepressant, it switched me into mania. And I honestly, that was the closest I ever felt to not wanting to live anymore,
Mm.
because my thoughts were racing so much,
So much.
and
Yeah.
it just felt so uncontrollable, right?
Mhm.
And so how did you connect with the child psychiatrist who started me on
Well,
lithium?
that came through the school, actually. Because
Okay.
we had a series of meetings, and I have to say that we would have these massive roundtable meetings with your teachers, with the guidance counselor, with the principal, with the social worker, etc. And it was at that point that they referred you to the child psychiatrist who was local in Mississauga.
Right.
The good thing is that we had already had a diagnosis at that point from the other psychiatrist, but we needed to know that there could be somebody who would follow you, because the psychiatrist that we knew was a neuropsychiatrist that I knew professionally, and so he saw you immediately, but he could not be your treating psychiatrist, right?
Uh-huh.
Because you were a minor, you
Yeah.
were still a child at the time. And so, we discussed that at the meeting at your school.
Mhm.
And immediately they then said that they knew of a child psychiatrist who was local and made that referral.
Yeah.
And so that's how that came about.
So this meeting was actually mid-May 2002, and I'm looking at this elaborate documentation, a letter that my mom had written, and
gosh, you got
to the principal. And
Excuse me.
there was a lot of advocating and planning, because I know one of the things that
Like,
you can, yeah, one of the things that was important was for me to reduce stress, because stress is a trigger for depression and mania. And so because of that, I was put on reduced course load. So I remember, instead of having like 4 courses, I had 3, and then a period of where I could study and I could, do my work. And yeah, because of that, because of your advocacy, Mom, my high school years were not as busy as maybe the typical student. And I did excel in school, to the point where approaching my graduation, the special programs department head, is what they called it, said, Michelle Solomon has been a student at this high school since her grade 9 year. During that time, she suffered from bipolar disorder and has been under the care of a psychiatrist. Michelle has been successful in achieving her academic results with only a few accommodations from the school. Extra time was allotted, if necessary, for her exams, and her course load was reduced in her senior years. It is very evident that Michelle's character strengths, her ability to advocate for herself, and her competency in her academic areas have allowed her to be successful in spite of her illness. If any other information is required, please don't hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, the special programs department head. And so, yeah, I did get connected to the childhood psychiatrist. And when I started lithium, I think that was around grade 10. because grade 11 and 12, I pretty much felt more like myself again. But I remember the adjustment period was so hard. I remember getting up, and this is now being on lithium, getting up and going to school and being so tired, like just feeling weighed down. It was hard. It was really hard to go to school and to study and just push through. And that's what I did. I pushed through against that heaviness, against that weight. And eventually on lithium, this went away, but it tends to, because it's an anti-manic medication, it prevents you from getting too much energy and from your mood getting too high. So it did work.
No excitement in your life.
It did. Yeah, it did work to keep me balanced though, and I am grateful for it. I was on it for 20 years. And in that time, it did what it was supposed to do. And I remember when I first started on it, I was really scared because, when you know yourself, even with the challenges and ups and downs that came with the illness, you know who you are. And when you put a pill or any foreign substance into your body, it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. You just have to have faith that it's going to work. And if it doesn't, then you can try something else. But, lithium out of the other options, I remember, was the best one for me. We just tried one and went with it. And it was the one I ended up being on.
Yeah, I think you were certainly one of the fortunate ones, because
Yeah.
I remember when you were in high school and you got involved with the Mood Disorders Association, and they had bestowed an award on you. One of the things that really struck me with the group of other awardees was that you really benefited, number one, obviously from the medication, because it worked. You were not on a bunch of different ones once you had that diagnosis.
Yeah.
But also you were not in and out of hospital. And everyone else there talked about the challenges that they experienced with that roller coaster of being in and out of hospital and trying different things, and issues with drugs and addiction and you name it. And so I always felt that regardless of what was going on, and because of what was going on, you were so blessed, because you said, Mom, my family was my hospital.
Yeah.
You always said that my family was my hospital. And so this is something that I really want family members to take away, is that, especially in this day and age, we cannot look to the healthcare system to fix a situation. We cannot look to a physician or a mental health expert to be everything for your loved one. That it is so much a combination of all of those things. But at the end of the day, you know your loved one the best, and they know themselves the best. And so there are a variety of things that you need to work on simultaneously, towards that sort of holistic approach that we're promoting. So it's about believing and having that confidence, really, that you arm yourself. And so becoming very well educated is so important, because what I found is that when I say family, like your extended family, cousins, aunts, etc., they have no idea. They are there, and you can have conversations with them, but until you're there, and unless you're there, you really don't understand what it's like to have a child or a sibling with bipolar disorder. And so don't expect an aunt or a cousin, or as a parent, your sibling or an uncle, to really be able to give you the kind of support that you need. It's really people within that closer circle who are with the affected person, the person with the diagnosis
Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis who
Yeah.
really get it.
Right.
People do not get it.
Yeah. Or you have to live with that person. Cause I know a
Live with it,
lot
yeah.
these days, like aunts or an uncle or, you know, a
Yeah.
grandmother might live. And, you know, as we live
If
with
you're
our
living with
grand,
a person,
then you
exactly, that's what I
know,
mean.
then
Yeah,
you see
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I also just wanted to note that I never was hospitalized, thankfully. To be hospitalized, you have to be a danger to yourself and to others. I particularly remember heading to Hamilton, heading to my grandparents, you know, and,
Yes.
you know, Caribbean families, Caribbean parents, if you start acting out of line, this is before they knew it was happening, you get sent to your grandparents or your grandmother so they could straighten you out.
This was not a decision that was taken lightly. This was after
Yeah.
years of agonizing days and nights that were sleepless, of you deciding at 2 o'clock in the morning that you wanted to go for a walk. And so
Yeah.
we had put in an alarm system to advise us when the front door was open. And it would go off and we would look at each other, okay, so who's gonna go after Michelle tonight?
My sister.
And sometimes all three of us would go, your father, myself, and your sister, in different directions because
They didn't know where I went.
because we didn't know where you went. Where was Michelle at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh, she's down at McDonald's or whatever. So again, we were so blessed that you were not involved in drugs. You were not involved in criminal behavior.
But I remember one of my aunts thought that I was on drugs because of the high energy. You know, they said,
Yes.
she said, are you sure she's not on any drugs? So let me tell you, sometimes the manic symptoms of having lots of energy, talking
Yes.
fast,
Yeah.
being more disobedient and
Yes.
swearing
Yes.
and that kind of thing can mimic being on drugs. And
Yes,
I think I
absolutely.
had to do a urine tox at one point just to make sure, yes, because when you diagnose someone, you have to rule
Yeah,
out these
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And so I remember having to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know,
But
I never thought you were, I personally never
yeah,
thought you were on
yeah.
drugs. No.
And anyone who knows me today, I'm very much anti-drug because I'm a very sensitive person to things, and I've learned that anything in my body can affect me very quickly, and that's just how I am. And you know, so that is something that I'm very much, I've had to listen to myself, and I've also had to listen to psychiatrists at the time because they said don't drink coffee because that's a stimulant and you're on this medication that's to keep you, you know, an anti-manic to keep you stabilized. Don't drink coffee. And still to this day, I'm not a coffee drinker, like 20 odd years later.
Yes.
And I've always been like, I don't want to take it. I don't want to smoke weed. I don't want to do this because I honestly don't know how I would respond. And it's not worth it to me to take that risk.
Yeah.
Especially after being through what you've been through as a person, you know, who's experienced the highs and the lows of bipolar disorder.
Yes.
You don't want to jeopardize that.
Yeah.
I really didn't. And so.
And we are so grateful for that.
Yeah.
So grateful for that because I mean, we know of people, you know, in circles, family, and so who did not have the same, you know, fortune, who weren't diagnosed with a psychiatric a disorder, but did get involved in drugs, and it just kills the family, you know.
Yeah,
So,
it's a very hard addiction, and I could see how people may turn to drugs to treat the mania because let me tell you, it takes control. And it's very hard to control that. It really is.
Yeah.
And so I could see why people have turned to drugs in the past and ways to cope. But obviously being a teenager, you can't do that. I didn't have drugs in my home. It wasn't something I thought of turning to. It was just.
But certainly in high school, if you wanted it,
I guess
available. Like, I mean, you were in high school at that time, and so I think there's also a point where you have to take credit for those decisions that you've made because the environment was not necessarily supportive, right? We know that there were teenagers who were getting high every day, whether it was weed or something else. And I think that's where your spirituality and your upbringing made a huge difference. And you were very, very focused on your spiritual health and development.
Yeah.
And you were surrounded by people who paid attention.
Yeah.
They paid a lot of attention.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for mentioning that, because at the same time, when I was 15, we attended a Pentecostal church, and a dear cousin of mine, an older cousin, had invited me out, and they had asked me if I wanted to give my life to Jesus and to be a follower of Christ. And I decided that I would. Now, up until that point, I always was a believer, and I always believed in God and would turn to God. But this was kind of like a big declaration in that denomination. That was the custom. And I remember doing that and accepting Christ and becoming, like voluntarily deciding to be a Christian. And we were all at one point baptized in the Pentecostal church. And my faith has always been, there's an inner something, there's an inner force, an inner drive that I know has kept me safe to this day, that has kept me going in times when I was pushing against, the side effects of medication, or, just
life
keeping me,
circumstances.
together. And so my faith was really, really important to me. So thank God for lithium. I was on that. I finished high school. I got a letter from my high school that I was, doing well and had succeeded. And I went on to university, and I remember applying. So my average at the end of high school wasn't as high as I had wanted to be. And I remember thinking, because of what I had gone through, but I made it through. And so I applied to a couple universities, and when I received that acceptance letter, I'll never forget, we were all there. I opened my letter and I got accepted to Western University's program for nursing. And oh my God, we jumped and we cried and we did all sorts of things. We were so excited because everybody knew what I had gone through in those high school years.
And just another perspective on that. So the joy was, yes, in your acceptance, but the other part of it was that you were going to be at the same school that had also accepted your sister.
Right.
And so the joy for me was to know that the support that you both needed would be there.
Yeah,
That you would
we
have
had
a
each-
sibling there to support you, to keep an eye on you, for us to have those sort of conversations with. And at the same time, because she was only 17,
Yeah.
we weren't eager for her to go off to university
Oh,
by
yeah.
herself, because we didn't think she was ready. But together, we knew that together, the two of you would have a very,
Yeah.
really strong force
Yeah.
together.
And
So,
we did. I
Yeah.
always like to say that my sister followed me to university. But it was true, she got accepted to many more schools than I did. So I really felt that she waited until I got my letter of acceptance to come with me. And that just goes to show the support and the love that I had from my sisters and my family. So my sister set me straight. I like to believe that she followed me to Western, but she got accepted there and went on her own will, not because I was going, but because she wanted to go. And so we ended up going to the same university, and that was a blessing. So I wanted to ask you, Mom, throughout this time, where did you turn to for support? Like, you studied behavioral medicine, and but like, where did you get the strength and the emotional support from to support me?
well, to be honest with you, I think that, and this is gonna sound really arrogant, but the support that I got was a very indirect kind of support. You know, it wasn't support specific to your mental health challenge. It was a support of having family, for example, where I always knew that, for example, that my parents always had my back.
Yeah, I was
You know,
gonna
that
say
they
my
were
grandparents were number
they were
one.
they were number one. They were always
Yeah.
there. And your grandmother in particular was very unique because she was the matriarch of the family. She was the sister that looked after her brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and the auntie that all of your cousins look towards.
Yeah, 13
But
siblings.
exactly. But the interesting thing, and I think this is important, is that one of her younger brothers had a mental health issue.
Mm.
And I always remember my mother being so very, very protective of him
Yeah, I remember
in
that
a
too.
very concrete way. So she supported him. He ended up living with our family. And she had an openness to mental illness and an understanding that I think was
Mm.
very much ahead of her time. Very, very
Yeah.
much ahead of her time.
Mm.
And she did not see him as incapable or different. He was differently abled as far as she was concerned, and she
Right.
focused on the things that he could do.
Yeah.
So he lived with us and he looked after the house. He did things like cleaning and the ironing and the cooking and all of those things. So she created an environment for him where he could flourish, right? And so when your symptoms came up, it wasn't a question of who do we turn to. There was an intrinsic sense that we're just gonna do this.
Yeah.
We're gonna do this. There's no other option. Family is who this is how this is addressed. And so that is really the biggest support, is that kind of modeling that was never sort of talked about in a very open, deliberate way. It just was.
Yeah.
So when we talk about family support, I wouldn't say that my siblings were not supportive or I didn't rely on them, but we didn't talk about, it was kind of an arm's length kind of thing. Like when you were having your periods of insomnia, and you'd be up all night talking to your cousins and things like that.
Oh yeah.
I think, your aunts just saw that as extreme teenage behavior. It wasn't really seen as a symptom of a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Like I didn't talk to them on a day-to-day basis or even a weekly basis about what you were going through. It would be in retrospect that we say, oh, we were having a hard time with Michelle or whatever. So you could not rely on them for the degree of understanding
Yeah.
that was required.
For no fault of their own, of course, but I think being able to talk to people, like I don't remember you joining a support group or talking to other parents who had teenagers going through similar situations, but I know people, you tend to get support from people who have been there. And I felt like we were we handle things within our family very much so, and we didn't have the outside resources necessarily, aside from obviously my psychiatrist, and I had a family doctor.
There wasn't much going on in terms of outside resources, to be honest with you, at that time.
Yeah.
People were not talking about mental health the way if I were an alcoholic or you were addicted to drugs, there would have been more support at that time, quite frankly. So at that time, I really relied just on my education.
Right. Yeah.
I hunkered down. I paid attention to all of the textbooks. I read a lot. I spoke with some of my colleagues who were in class with me, my friend Jane, right? So they had much more insight and ability to support me than people within my own sort of circle of friends and family. So I think that the professional support that I got, the psychiatrist, for example, who diagnosed you was a colleague, who saw you immediately in his home, right?
Yeah.
So we were fortunate for those sorts of connection, definitely.
Well, I do want to talk about what you did to help me, because you talked about how you gained support, and it was mostly within the family and your colleagues, and there wasn't really anything outside of that that I was connected to. But Mom, you really helped me cognitively a lot throughout that time when I was experiencing anxiety and the OCD. You just knew the things to say to help me. And a strategy that I use still to this day that you first taught me was deep breathing.
Oh.
You're probably like, what was that?
Yeah,
You
that was a thing. That was a thing. But 20 years ago, it wasn't so
Yeah.
much a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you taught me to lie down with one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly, and through pursed lips, and to do the breathing. And that really did help me. You know, you sat me down and taught me those tools that I still use to this day. But you were really, you were there in a very medical way in terms of helping to get me connected to the doctors. And you were also there just to be a support when I felt guilty about something, you know, because a lot of times some of the behaviors that you have with bipolar disorder, after they're done and after all is said and you're not manic anymore, there's lots of regret and there's lots of guilt.
Yes.
And you always were open to listening to me. You always said, there's nothing you can't tell me, Michelle. You know, there's nothing you can say that that will make me not love you. And so I always knew that I could come to you and I could share things. And sometimes I just had to be like, blah, you know, like
I became your conscience.
Yeah, but it's a really good point, because we're not meant to keep things that don't align with our moral compass and our values. Because like I said, I grew up, you know, I'm Christian, and I had a high standard of morals that was set for myself that came from my grandparents and my family and the way we treat one another. And so if I did something that was outside of that, I had a very strong conscience, and I couldn't keep things. And so I would tell you about them. And I really appreciate that you always made me feel that I wasn't abnormal. So a lot of the tools I had, you know, just teaching me the deep breathing, and I was able to release, you know, the thoughts and feelings that I had. And that really helped me. I started to develop tools early on, and you were a huge part of creating that toolbox, you know, in terms of the deep breathing, stopping thinking patterns, you know, the relationships between thought and behavior, and using your imagination to take yourself to different places and things like that, you know, that I really value and that I know work for me to this day. And so, in addition to that, I also started to read up a lot in high school about bipolar disorder, and just learning that there were so many personalities, like well-known people that also had this diagnosis, which made me feel very good, because I was like, oh, these people who have this diagnosis tend to be very intelligent and have done a lot for society. And there's so many names, you know, that I won't even go through so much, but I will highlight Kay Redfield Jamieson, you know, lots of actors. Virginia Woolf was huge, yes.
Britney Spears.
Yeah, and it's something, right? And I remember just coming to this conclusion that whatever we experience as human beings is normal. There really isn't like an abnormal. And for every behavior that we learn about, we tend to give a label or a title to it. But we're just experiencing humanity, different extremes, different things, and we're learning to work through it. So thank you for that, because I really believe that God gave me you as a mom with the knowledge that you had and the tools that you had to help me during a very difficult time.
Yes. Well, you are very welcome, Michelle. But I always say, when people talk about, oh, the parents are so amazing, I always talk about the other side of the coin, which is that parents become the people that they are because of the children that they have as well.
Mhm.
And so my experience as a mother and raising three amazing daughters, really that is what has allowed me to grow into the person that I am today. But it doesn't stop there, because my
Yeah.
hope for tomorrow is that I would be even a better person and a
Yeah.
more humane person, a more compassionate person tomorrow than I am
Mhm.
today, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of symbiosis here, right? We become who we need to be in different situations. And yes, you are grateful for me, and I am grateful for you.
Mm. It's a reciprocal thing, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what would you say gives us a sense of freedom from mental health challenges? Saying all of this, what would you say are the key things to find freedom from mental health challenges?
That's a tough question, but what what I would say is that we have to put aside our old beliefs.
Mm,
I
yeah.
think this is the key, because it all comes from what we believe.
Mm,
And those beliefs may be either those that have been handed down through the generations, those beliefs that are imposed by society, by friends, even old beliefs that we have that are really driven by our own ego, and those may be related to defending an image we have of what a good parent is. And so
mm,
sometimes it's so easy to become fixated about what our role might be, or what the expectation might be, or how does this make us look, or what is someone else thinking of me. And I think all of those
mm,
things together need to just be put down.
right.
Forget about all those beliefs and look at what is in front of you. Who is in front of you? What are they going through? How we can support them. Because when that happens, it's about them. It's not about us.
Yeah.
It is totally about that person. And it doesn't matter about what our assumption was, or our expectation about what we should do, or what happened before, or what might happen, and all that sort of stuff. We just need to let go, right? And allow a situation that presents itself to tell us, to tell us what the reality is in that moment, and address it in that moment. And I think that when we have faith, I think the other thing that helps
Mhm.
us is to have some faith, because faith will give us the confidence to believe in tomorrow, and to believe that whatever shackles that you might feel are there, or whatever sense of blame or doubt, or the responsibilities for having done anything wrong, or whatever, that those shackles are completely disbanded. So
That's
yeah.
great, because I was gonna ask you next how your faith played a role as a parent in this journey, and you talked about believing in tomorrow despite the past or what you've done, not looking at coulda, woulda, shouldas, and having faith
Yeah.
in in God and
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah. And faith, it's an interesting thing, because I remember one time, and when I say faith, and I say
Mhm.
God, I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about organized religion at all. Because in
Mhm.
fact, I think that the organized religion and some of the impact of that can be very destructive, in fact. And I recall one time I was actually delivering a message in church, and I had mentioned that I had two daughters with disabilities. And I was just very open about it. I saw nothing to be ashamed of. I felt no blame in the
Mhm.
situation. And afterwards, one of the members of the congregation came up to me, and she was like absolutely surprised. She said, "Oh, Sister Shelley, I'm so surprised that you said that. because all I could think of is like, what would you have done to have two daughters with a
Oh my
disability?
gosh.
And that she was surprised that I had mentioned that.
Wow.
That somehow there was some spiritual evil or something that I had done in the past to have brought this situation upon myself. And that how could I be so, I guess, oblivious of that to even, mention this in front of the whole congregation. And so I realized that, we have to be so careful in with whom we share information, with whom we share our challenges, because there are a lot of people who have very, very different belief systems, and where they see that mental health is some kind of a curse that has been put on a person. So when we talk about faith, I'm talking about a deep spirituality. I'm talking about a relationship between myself and my God, my universe, however you want to call it. But this is not about specifically being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a anything. This is about who you are in the context of this bigger universe, and this notion that you have a purpose, that you are of great value, and that we are here to uplift each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do believe that there is purpose, and I have to look back at things that way because I do believe that my experience has prepared me to be a better nurse, an empathetic person, and it put that drive in me to want to support people going through similar challenges. And I learned that you really need a holistic approach to mental health. That it's not just medication, all the other work, the therapy and changing your thought processes and having a good environment and having an outlet to praise God and to release emotions was really important for me, and exercise and so many things. And it took a long time to figure it out, but definitely that purpose drives us. And when it comes to the church and religion, there's definitely a lot of myths in regards to the cause of mental illness and how they attach that spiritual causation to it. That has to be challenged. The church will like to have a certain presentation, and to put up a front and to not really present reality. But you were always very real, right? And so I think that part of your faith, Mom, is really being real and coming in front of God and with the reality, and you never put up a front.
Yeah. It's I think it can be really summed up in a few words. And we always say God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. And within that, people come away thinking that it's not okay to talk about the challenge. It's not okay to talk about the pain. There's certain environments I've been in where people only want to present everything in this positive, shiny light. And if we talk about the pain that we're going through, we talk about the challenges, that somehow we are disrespecting, that we are not honoring God, that we are not recognizing his grace and mercy to us. And I think that there's a certain denial, right? It's like if we deny what pain we're going through, that somehow it is part of the treatment, or the answer will come, as a result of that. And I think that the answer really comes in really just acknowledging where you are at and acknowledging the pain, because in that acknowledgement comes an opportunity for problem solving. It comes with an opportunity to look at various options. It comes with an opportunity to get the support that you need. And it also comes with an opportunity to recognize what you have available in your toolbox as a capable person to move away from your own needs to address the needs of others as well. And so this purpose becomes a huge thing, because in examining your purpose, And in giving to others, there's so much healing that happens for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that when we do that, we can see that we address the medication. Yes, we address supports. Yes, we participate in various activities and events, whether it's a local fundraiser or whether it's something to bring awareness, like defeat depression or whatever. But in doing all of these bits and pieces, all of them may be a small piece, but together they create the change that the person needs and that the family and the friends that surround them needs to feel whole again.
Yeah, and so you can't create tools for your toolbox unless you present the situation as it is, or the problem, right?
Absolutely.
Then if you don't do that, you won't get the right tools, the right size tools, and all these things to fix a situation if you don't present the truth, if you don't present the reality. And so come as you are, right?
Yes.
Come as we are. And talking about tools, you had recommended some resources, and I just wanted to focus on that right now. One of them is a movie called In Our Mother's Garden, and the other is the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute. Tell me a bit about why you recommended these two resources for people.
Well, the first one, In My Mother's Gardens, that movie really touched me. First of all, it's a documentary. It's a series of interviews of women of color. And what it does is it really helps, well, it helped me, I think, to really see that common thread that we all have from the perspective of women who have become mothers, whether we have given birth, whether it's biological motherhood, or whether it's motherhood by adoption, by intention, through friendship or mentorship or whatever. So motherhood, and how looking at our ancestry makes such an incredible difference to understanding who we are, and to be able to really contextualize pain and the challenges and the good and bad in every situation. And for example, in my garden, the only thing that I've created in my backyard right now is a yin yang garden. And I did that because every time I open my bedroom window, I wanted to be reminded of the different energies that we experience at any moment, the positives and negatives, the rational experiences and how those play into the emotional stuff, the stuff that's edgy and the stuff that makes us feel warm, that it's all part of us. And that documentary really brought all of those concepts, I think, together. And I think it's about how it situates us within the spectrum of time, right? And that, yes, we may be very insignificant, but we're also very significant.
Yes.
So I love that. The other,
the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute.
I've known about them for several years, and I really like the learning opportunities that they have there. I think that there's nothing like arming yourself with education and resources, that there's only so much that you can do sort of just talking about something. Right? You can talk about it to death. But until you learn things that are well rooted in research, until it is very well evidence informed and or evidence based, I think that it's just talk. And so being a researcher, being a practitioner, being a mother who's walked this journey alongside you, Michelle, I think it's so important that each one of us, whatever we want to know about, we Google it, we learn, we study it. And mental health is no different. whether it's your own mental health or whether it's someone else who is in your circle, someone that you care about, someone you love, take time to learn about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the most important resource and the most important support is what you develop and the wisdom, not just the knowledge, but the wisdom that comes from having that knowledge and applying that knowledge and seeing what works for you or not.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. These resources will be available in the show notes. Mom, we've talked about a lot today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being my mom.
You're welcome.
I don't even know being a mom these days, it's such a huge responsibility. The older I get, the more I see all of the work and the love and the care. So thank you for being here, for sharing your experience and your wisdom.
You're most welcome, Michelle.
So in this episode, we shared a bit about my experience as a teenager, first experiencing symptoms of bipolar disorder and what some of my treatment looked like, and the support that my mom was able to provide for me and her experience finding support, as well as tools that I gained along the way to help me move through my emotions and to get through school. Thank you for listening to episode 2. If this conversation was helpful to you and you'd like to hear more, please follow This is Freedom on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. Also share it with a friend. We want to share information, experiences, and resources that support the mental health and spiritual health of our listeners, particularly the African, Black, and Caribbean diaspora, and racialized and marginalized people. There's been a higher percentage of Black youth reporting suicide attempts and Black youth ages 15 to 17 experiencing the greatest increase in deaths by suicide. So our work to raise awareness of mental health struggles and solutions in the ABC community is needed now more than ever. Ways you can help this podcast. You can support this podcast as a sponsor, help with our production, or be a guest. Contact information to reach out is in the show notes and on our website, freedommentalhealth.ca. There you can donate to this important project. Any help you can give is so greatly appreciated. This podcast is brought to you by Freedom Mental Health. I'm your host, Michelle Solomon. See you next time.